Well, I guess I can get started and do a quick introduction. Good evening, everyone. So my name is Kelsey Belahowski, and I'm the Learning and Community Engagement Curator at the Vernon Public Art Gallery. And I'm happy to welcome you to our first UBCO BFA Grad Artist Talk. I would like to take a moment to just acknowledge the fact that I'm currently situated on unceded Syilx territory. And so over the next few weeks, we will be hosting artist talks for 3 of the UBCO Visual Arts fourth year grad students. So due to COVID-19, their year-end graduation exhibition, Any Moment, has become accessible virtually, and we are offering a virtual artist talk to complement the exhibition. So we will be recording this talk and posting it online. So if you are uncomfortable with your video and audio being recorded and shared, please make sure your video and audio is turned off. You can do this by clicking the icons on the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. So first up tonight, we have Eclipse Galloway. So she's a current UBCO graduate with the Bachelor of Fine Arts degree. And she works in several mediums, including charcoal, ink, watercolor, and screen printing, with a recent focus on oil painting. Eclipse plans on continuing her studies to get an education degree, teaching either elementary school or high school art, but until then, she continues to explore painting the outdoors, seeing where her paintings take her. So let's give her a warm virtual welcome, and I will let you take it away with a Q&A period either at the very end, and if you have questions, you can either in the chat have them there and I can interrupt Eclipse to answer them, or you can just save them for the very end. And I think that's all. I'll turn off my video and we'll get started.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kelsey, for that intro. So I just want to say, first of all, thanks everyone for tuning in. I've been really excited to do this and to share kind of what I've been doing the last few years of art school. And thank you so much to the Vernon Public Art Gallery for hosting this talk for me. So I'm going to go ahead and try to share my screen with you guys. And we can get started. See if this works. Whoops. Okay. All right, so hopefully that works for you guys. So I've called this presentation Zooming In on Abstraction because I've been exploring a lot of different themes. Through my whole life as an artist, I've always been interested in art, but these last few years really just focusing on this shift from traditional landscape painting to kind of zooming in further and further in on the landscape to find these like abstract, sort of ambiguous organic forms that naturally occur in the environment. So I'm just trying to find like my own sort of unique style in that way. So a little bit of a background. I think it's important to for this whole talk, and just me as a person, it was a very formative experience growing up in Edgewood. It's a really small town in the West Kootenays. There's like less than 500 people, and it really had an impact on who I am as a person and on my art and really everything in my life. I also want to acknowledge that the land that I've lived on my whole life, besides when I'm in school at UBCO in Kelowna, we're on unceded Syilx territory. So I'm very grateful and lucky to have been able to live and do all of my art and be inspired by this kind of landscape. So this is a view looking out over the lake. In my hometown, you can see kind of the majority of like the downtown itself is right here on the right-hand side. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but it's very, very small. So this is just across from my house. Growing up, we didn't have Wi-Fi, cell service, or TV. So it was most of the things that we did were just outside. Like I would either be playing with my brothers or my friends and just making forts and just exploring the landscape. And this really had a big impact on me as a person. Just being immersed in this kind of like wilderness always kind of makes you really in tune to your natural surroundings. And it's always kind of showed up in my art. I've always really been interested in all the organic forms found close up in landscapes and the beauty and magnificence of like far away landscapes of mountains and lakes and forests and everything. And here's another picture that just right across from my house. Edgewood also has a really interesting history that I won't really go into, but the original town was flooded, so there's lots of like really interesting kind of old ruins that you can find throughout in the forest, like where the community used to be. And I also just find that really inspiring and intriguing that there's all these really strange kind of moments that you can find in the middle of nowhere around here. So these next few watercolors are from when I was in high school. I didn't really start oil painting until university. So my main thing that I would watercolor would just be almost always landscapes. So I would take photos, or in this case, I would go out to the bottom of my driveway and just like paint outside, but sometimes I would take photos and translate them to watercolors later on. But this was like really like the kind of style I was working in, just these very small kind of like 5 by 7-ish inches watercolors. This is another one. This is of Watcham Lake. This is really close by to my hometown as well. So in university, I started looking more, getting more inspired and just like doing a lot more research, especially having the internet helped. So I started getting really inspired by oil and acrylic painters. So post-impressionism and impressionism was something I was really interested in at the beginning of university. So I love this landscape still. But it was really like landscapes like this were like my main focus. They're realistic in the way that they're not diverging too much from reality, but they're still very stylized, and they have that really bold brushstroke look. And it also has like a real heightened sense of color. And so these were the kind of paintings that I was looking at while I was trying to figure out what kind of paintings I wanted to do. Group of 7 was hugely inspiring to me in my first painting classes. So this was one of my very first oil paintings that I did. Very Group of 7 inspired, as you can tell. There's like a heavy use of outline, and this was painted from a photograph I took myself. So it's kind of important to note that this wasn't painted outside within that landscape. This was translated from a photograph that I took. This next painting was done a year later, and you can kind of tell it's still the same sort of style, but it's kind of drawing more on like the psychedelic aspect of just like these naturally occurring landscapes, like in Alberta in the Badlands. You get these really weird looking landscapes. So I was kind of playing on that a little bit more, like bring the strange into the landscape a little bit more. I was also experimenting more with thick paint. I don't know if you can really tell by looking at the screen, but there's some really built up areas of paint. And so this is when I kind of first started getting into like using impasto paint. At the same time, oh no, my screen is froze. Well, anyways, I'll keep it on here for a second. But yeah, really all that I was doing in my drawing classes, my screen printing classes, my painting classes, it was all just like taking photographs that I had taken on road trips or whatever from places from around my house and translating that into a painting or screen printing art form. So this one was done the same year that I did that first landscape. This is again like right across from my house. It's a 6-layer UV screen print. So it's an original, but there's I think around 6 originals, and it's built up using different layers, and I'll explain that a little bit more later. But I'm just kind of showing that at the same time, like even in screen printing, there was like a heavy emphasis on imitating nature. So this is also a photograph that I took of some baby birds on my property, and then I translated that with ink and did this like highly detailed kind of photo or realistic looking bird's nest. So this next painting, this painting opened the door to what my painting style looks like now. It was kind of like the very first artwork that went from having like a subject with like a main subject in my painting to having this sort of all over composition. So you can see here an all-over composition is a composition basically that's lacking a focal point. So it doesn't have a main focus to the painting at all. It's kind of, every part of the painting is just as important as each other. So I was really drawn to this kind of composition because of this, because I liked this idea of being able to look everywhere around the painting and not get too hung up or distracted on one element. I was also really thinking about strategies to pull your eye around the canvas. So one of those strategies is using diagonal leading lines. So when I was taking this photo, was very intentional. Like I went for a hike and was taking lots of photos of the rocks, trying to find this perfect cropped photo of like a close-up of the landscape that looked like a painting almost already. So I don't have the original photo, but the photo looks pretty similar to the painting. I was really just like directly copying the painting, and it was kind of easy in a way or to figure out what the painting should look like, because all I had to do was just like copy what I was seeing in the photo, which originally kind of looks like a painting itself, to this oil painting medium. So the summer after I painted that, I just did a lot of practicing by painting pictures outside. I was urged to start doing plein air painting instead of painting from photographs, to try to convert like what I'm seeing in the world to like the picture plane, instead of copying from one flat surface of a photograph to another flat surface. You get a lot more depth from painting from real life. So I just started practicing more to develop my painting style, and also practicing getting that spatial depth onto the picture plane. So here's one example of the many paintings I did that summer. Another thing I did was also take a lot of photos of things that were inspiring to me. When I didn't have my paints with me, I'd have my phone on me, or maybe I'd have my good camera, and I'd just snap these photos of instances that I'd find in the landscape that already kind of looked like a painting to me, that would have these interesting like all over compositions and these naturally occurring patterns. So this is pollen that's floating on water. And I just thought it looked really interesting. To me, this looks already like a painting. And so I'll show you guys later, but I ended up doing a painting of a section of this photo. Again, this is kind of like just finding spots in nature that have this sort of all over pattern. This next photo I translated into a painting, and I really became curious with lichen. I've done several lichen paintings. I just think that they're very abstract looking in themselves. And they also usually have this beautiful like teal color that is hard to find in nature otherwise. So here's the resulting painting from that photo. This is like the first abstract piece that I've done, because all of the other ones were like immediately recognizable. This one isn't necessarily immediately recognizable. I had some people tell me that they thought it was lichen growing on some things. I had other people tell me it looked like bacteria. And this was quite exciting for me, because I liked that people had to look at it for a minute longer to figure out what it looked like to them. So that's when kind of a light bulb went off, and I realized I wanted to start exploring this sort of line between abstract and reality, or recognizable and ambiguous. Again, I'll show the difference with the picture plane. Like with this photo, you can see that it kind of recedes into the distance on the right-hand side there, but in my painting, it flattened the image quite a lot. I like the resulting pattern and the colors I used, but it was really hard to get that spatial depth just from relying on that photograph. So in my next painting, I decided to work from real life. So I had these sunflowers, and I didn't work from the photographs that I took of them, but I had them right in front of me as I was painting, and I found it a little bit easier to try to achieve that depth in my paintings. And so because I was using a real life flower, as it was dying, I was painting the different stages of its life. So here's the painting. I kind of started at the top of the image and worked my way down, which was kind of funny, but that was like the only way I could really think of doing it, because I wanted to have that real, like that gradation between like alive flowers to dead. So and capturing the beauty of like every stage in those lives, because I don't necessarily think that fresh flowers are the most beautiful. This one was done from a bundle of dried mugwort leaves. So also working from real life and not a photo, which I started getting more and more excited by this idea, because there was something missing when I was painting just strictly from photos. Like there is something really interesting about using those real life models and being able to like see the subtleties and tones easier and just everything. So this one also, like, it was a really abstract kind of scene in itself, because I had set up these colored fairy lights that were reflecting off the leaves in really bright, colorful ways. So the image or the model itself kind of looked sort of similar to this painting, even though the painting looks like fairly abstract colors. Those were the colors that I was seeing in real life for the most part. So now I want to talk a little bit about my screen prints, because although they're much different than my paintings, they still helped me get to the direction where I was finding myself in my final year with painting, with just the subject matter and like the ideas kind of behind them. So I started out these screen prints. Oh, first I'll maybe explain really briefly what screen printing is, because it is a little bit confusing because they do look like photographic images, but they're not digitally printed. They're like hand printed. Each layer of color is hand printed. So it's basically having this screen, like it's like t-shirt silk screening kind of. You make a stencil. So you can have a photographic stencil like I've used here, or you can have a drawn stencil like that those birds in the nest. That was a 1-layer print. I had drawn that picture of those birds and then exposed that image onto my screen. And then when I pushed the ink through, the parts with the stencil on would go onto the paper. So it's the same sort of idea with photographic screen printing, except for you would take a photo, you would color separate the cyan, magenta, yellow, and black layers. And then when you layer those layers on top of each other, the resulting image looks fairly photographic. So this is like maybe like a 9-layer screen print. And then you can kind of select which parts of the image you want to boost in saturation more. And so you can kind of selectively screen print over certain areas of the pictures. So that's kind of, it's hard to explain really quickly what UV screen printing is, but that's kind of it briefly. So for this picture, I was interested in using the white of the paper as part of the composition. So in a lot of prints or drawings, you'll have your image with the white border of the paper around. And so I wanted to stray away from doing that. I wanted to use the white of the page as part of the picture. So being just as important as like the flowers themselves. So I was trying to create these pictures where the flowers looked as if they were floating off of the background, kind of playing with like spatial depth. This one was a lot larger than the last screen print. I decided to go up in scale because it showed a lot more detail that way. And I really enjoyed the detail that I was getting in the photograph of that center of that sunflower. So I wanted to blow up the image more and really work on the center of that sunflower. I was getting really interested in like finding details within like the intricacies of these subjects that I was choosing. This one was also the first artwork that I did in university, I believe, that had a narrative to it. So this kind of has like an underlying environmental theme, because I've hidden, I don't know if you can see my cursor again, but there's this cigarette butt here on the top left-hand corner. So I've kind of hidden it among all the other petals. And so it's hard to see at first, but like once you see it, you see it. Like, so the idea behind that was kind of, it's the same thing with cigarette butts in real life. And like litter, a lot of the time, it just kind of seamlessly blends into the landscape. But to certain people like myself, it like kind of stands out as this ugly thing to me all the time. And just growing up where I grew up, when I see litter and like clear cuts and stuff, it really jumps out to me because I have such a strong admiration for our environment and a strong like respect for our natural surroundings. This is a photograph that I didn't end up turning into a screen print. It has little it has Q-tips and pieces of garbage hidden in the petals. So it's the same sort of idea of having this like beautiful image and kind of hiding ugliness within it. So I kind of wanted to have an environmental theme without detracting from the beauty of the subjects, like kind of more playing on the positivity of, look at how beautiful our landscape is. Like we shouldn't mar it with garbage or pollution. This print, again, the same, going off from the same theme. The subtle theme in this one, or the subtle hint, was the words preserve at the bottom of the page. So it's hard to see in the photo on the left-hand side that I've included, but I just used a gloss to write the words. So when you tilt the paper or you move back and forth and look at it, then you can like see the word preserve shine. And it kind of had like a double meaning because the flowers themselves were preserved, and then also talking about like preserving the environment. This one was a little bit different because I've titled it Memento Mori, which means reminder of death. You can see the theme of Memento Mori in like countless artworks, but you can see it in old classical paintings, like of Mary Magdalene, for example, like with the smoking flame. You can see like a flame dying out or a skull in a painting. There are all these like little reminders of death. So it's talking about the reminder of one's own death. But for me, I was thinking about how could I use flowers as a memento mori, but instead of as like a realization of, or a reminder of personal death, of like the death of our natural environment, like thinking about how the natural wilderness is disappearing and using flowers as a metaphor, or dying flowers as a metaphor. These are just really, really zoomed in images of pressed flowers. So these were really exciting images for me, and I didn't know why I was doing them at first. I thought maybe I would draw them and I used them for different art projects later on. But I was really interested in just finding like the most amount of detail that I could in the smallest amount of space. So, and I thought that it was really exciting that I could find these really abstract forms like within just normal everyday flowers, like, and to make something unrecognizable just by zooming in. So here's kind of a collage that I did of pressed flowers. Another one. And this is kind of like when I first started doing the nature collages too, that I started using for my later paintings. And this is the only screen print that I ended up doing from these scannings. Yeah. So that was kind of wrapped up my 4th year. I did my degree in 5 years, by the way, so my 5th year was my final year. At the beginning of 5th year and like the summer leading up to it, I was collecting a lot of flowers and taking photos and doing a lot of research on different artists. So Robert Wiens was an interesting artist to me because I just really liked the kind of idea behind why he was doing these paintings of these white pines. So I watched this little documentary, and he is mainly focusing on white pines because they're disappearing, and he's translated using a projector and watercolor these cropped images of pines and kind of bringing them down to like human scale. So I thought that was really interesting because instead of people going out and finding these disappearing like giant white pines in Ontario, you can just go into a gallery and the forest is kind of brought to you in a way. So I kind of thought that sort of resonated with me because I was kind of working in the opposite way, where it was instead of scaling down a large thing to meet the human scale, I was scaling up like little things that people were overlooking or that you couldn't actually see with your eyes without a magnifying glass or anything. I thought that was interesting. David Alexander is he's definitely one of my favorite contemporary artists, and he's had a huge impact on me stylistically in the last couple of years of painting. His paintings range from these kind of like crazy landscapes to more abstract. I'm just going to skip ahead a couple slides, but to these more abstract paintings. So these are his reflection paintings. He has a lot that look like this. These like really saturated, abstracted paintings of reflections in the water. So he has these, I'm really inspired though by his landscapes as well, because he's able to take something like a rock cliff and just make really abstract. And sometimes he crops in closely to the mountains so that you can't see the sky. So it's hard to tell that it's a landscape at first. The way in which he creates these paintings is also really interesting, because he'll go out and do these sketches, these field sketches, and then go back to his studio and fill it in kind of from memory. So you get these really expressive looking landscapes as a result. Peter Doig was also a huge inspiration to me. Just the energy or the mood that you get from looking at his paintings is really fascinating, I find. Like, he kind of has this sort of mystical feeling in his paintings. And this one I thought was really cool because it has these sort of layers. And that was something I was interested in exploring more, was more than one like layer, like looking through the picture plane when you're looking at an image. And then also at the same time, this is the beginning of this school year still that I'm doing all this research. I'm looking at group of 7 members, but valuing their more abstract works. So paintings like this, or like this one of this valley, it's like, you can tell it's a canyon with a river going through it, but it's a lot more abstract, like with its mark making, but the colors are also really bold, and the brush strokes are also very expressive. And so you kind of get this like this crazy, brilliant, like moving picture that isn't totally recognizable at first. And so I really started getting drawn to these paintings that didn't look super recognizable on your first glance at them. This one, I just really love the use of abstracted colors. And this is another group of 7 member. It's more of a close-up though, which I also am a little bit more interested in now, or like the close-up croppings of landscapes. I just think that they're just less paintings of them done, and I often just find that it's more intriguing than looking at landscapes of mountains or lakes. So one of my very first projects I did in my final graduating year, because I didn't really know what I was doing yet, was just taking flowers and using like a real vase of flowers, but kind of creating a composition where the flowers are all over the page. So using this all over composition. But I was trying to figure out how I could loosen up and, get these crazy marks like those David Alexander paintings, or those more abstract group of 7 paintings. But I've always been so used to the idea of like rigidly and like carefully imitating real life, like in this photo, that I have a hard time being expressive with my marks. So I decided to do a blind contour drawing, which is, if you don't know what that is, it's just it's drawing on your page without looking at your page. So you're following the shape of whatever you're drawing with your eyes and drawing at the same time. So you aren't allowed to lift your hand off the page, and you also can't look at what you're drawing. So it's kind of a way to improve your hand-eye coordination, but it also creates these really funny kind of drawings. So I decided to do a blind contour of the exact same flowers that I was originally painting over top of this work. And this took me like a lot of hours to finish. So it was kind of daunting, but I'm glad I did it. So this is the result. And I just thought it was like a really good exercise, if nothing else, in just like not being so precious with the things I was creating and just trying to loosen up more. Here is a drawing that I did from one of those scanned in images. So again, just like getting really interested in those abstract elements when you zoom in really close to a subject. Here's that pollen painting that I was telling you guys about earlier when we were looking at that photo. This is the resulting painting from it. With these kinds of works, copying the painting or those photos exactly, I was using the technique of, I would take a photo with the intention of making the photo, or with the intention of taking a photo of something that's already very abstract, and then just depicting that in the form of painting. It's already abstracted, so I didn't really have to do the work to abstract what I was seeing. It was already done for me by the pictures that I was taking. This is the first project I did using this new technique of using this jeweler's lamp, where there's this magnifying glass with a light bulb attached. And so I wanted to start drawing from real life, but also drawing close up, because I really liked those scanned in images of the flowers, but again, I didn't want to flatten the image by drawing from a photograph. So I came up with a solution of using a magnifying glass that I could both work in close up subjects, but also work from real life as well. So this is just my painting rag that I just thought it'd be a fun thing to draw or to paint, and it was. The painting looks fairly abstract, even though I was trying my best in the short amount of time that I took to paint it to accurately depict it. But I was pleased with the abstract result. And I was also kind of like playing with this style of like this looser, sort of bolder, thicker paint. I also was looking at a lot of biomorphic sculptures, and these kind of inspire my work as well, because in both of these works, these are both artists that work with like organic looking forms, so they're not actually depicting anything specifically, but they're kind of using just forms that you can see in all sorts of different life, like shells or plants or coral, and kind of combining all these different weird organic elements to create these like abstract, like almost like mutated looking sculptures. And so I kind of like that idea of like finding things and abstracting it further to create these like organic, but like still sort of realistic in a way looking paintings. So I decided to begin building nature models because I really wanted to keep painting nature. That was something that's really important to me. I find that like the most fascinating and abstract forms are just found within nature. So with the style of painting that I'm working in now, I'll go out for a walk or something and collect all sorts of little pieces of interesting looking bits of nature. I also try to find like non-invasive species and like local plants. And so I kind of create these collages or like sculptures that I can then magnify and paint. So here's another model that I made. And here's the accompanying painting. So I found these were kind of fun to do because I'd create these models, and looking at the photo, you can tell what it is, but just by like painting it and boosting the colors a little bit and abstracting the forms just a tiny bit, I was able to create these like really ambiguous looking paintings. And there's still elements that are recognizable, like the leaf in there, but for the most part, they end up looking fairly abstract. Yeah, with this painting compared to my other ones, it has a little bit more depth of space in it. It has some different layers. So I'm really trying to use the, what am I trying to say? Trying to use like the full depth of space that you can within a canvas. So trying to make your eye lead around the picture, but also lead like in and out throughout the painting. So I kind of wanted to have that depth going into the picture plane as well. Here's another model that I made. I had these pieces of thread there to kind of section off the little tiny part that I wanted to focus on. And then I put that under my magnifying glass, and here's the painting that came out of it. So part of my process is also, like I'll take these models and I'll paint with acrylic until I feel that I've had like a really good handle and a good memory on what the model looks like. But at a certain point, it depends in each painting, but I'll usually get rid of the model at partway through. Like it'll usually be around halfway through the painting. I'll decide to stop looking at the model and to more access my memory to finish the painting and to go like intuitively with which colors will make this painting look interesting and make it look interesting as a painting, as an abstract painting itself, not a painting of broken petals. So here's the inspiration for the next painting I'm going to show. I kind of combined like the compositional elements of the lines found in that leaf with the lichen. So here's a little sketch that I did, just kind of practicing the lichen, or just practicing painting the lichen. And this painting kind of like really became its own thing. It is supposed to be another study for this Tangled Pathways painting, but it kind of became its own thing. It has like a very similar composition as my big painting that I'll show you next, but the colors started going really crazy and I just kind of made it its own, just for fun. So this is an early stage of that painting. I just kind of wanted to show what the early sort of composition looked like. And I was really using that line found within the leaf and then filling that out with the lichen though. And then, yeah, at a certain point, I think it was around this point or maybe a little bit further, I stopped looking at the lichen entirely and just tried to like fill it in with my imagination. So yeah, here's the resulting, whoops. Here's the resulting painting. You can't really tell, but you can tell a little bit that the painting is, the paint is built up really thick on the surface. Like especially with this particular piece, there's some really, really thick painted areas. And sometimes I just glob it on because I want it to be thick. Sometimes it just gets built up because I change my mind so many times about what I'm doing that I end up painting like 7 layers. And yeah, I just kind of just keep painting until it feels like it's done. That's always like a really tricky thing for me, deciding when a painting is done, because it kind of feels like you could just keep painting and painting forever. But at a certain point, I stop. Here's showing the next model for my next painting. I was kind of, these are turkey tail mushrooms. And I just kind of did some sketches to just kind of get familiar with the forms, which is something I did a lot when I was working from these models, was to do a lot of sketches and get really familiar with the forms so that I feel really comfortable with ditching the models and just painting from my imagination. So there's the painting. And so far I've had one person that's been able to identify pardon me, that these are turkey tail mushrooms, so that's cool. Sorry. Yeah, so this next one is the same thing. I really ditched the model very early on, so this painting became really weird and crazy by the end of it. One thing I kind of wanted to mention also was the writer that we hired for our website. So our graduating class has a website online. You can find it at anymomentexhibition.ca, I think, or .org. Oh gosh, I don't know. But anyways, we hired this writer, Michelle Weinstein, to kind of write about the experience of looking at our work and kind of putting it into more of like an art historical perspective. And she did a really good job of conveying what I was thinking about my work in a lot better use of words. So the way that she kind of described my work, or one thing that I thought was really interesting, was when she talked about my layers of paint being likened to the layers of earth. And so I thought that was kind of cool, because that's so much about what nature is like just lots of different layers, like things growing on top of each other, things decomposing and creating layers, or layers of rock. And so layers are really important to my painting. This is another model I built. This is looking through that magnifying glass again. For this one, I was really intentionally trying to create a little environment. So kind of like a little like area in space that like looks like it could almost be its own landscape, but it's different from what we know from like our regular landscapes that you'd see in paintings. So here's the painting. I was really wanting to create like sort of these, maybe not mystical, but like intriguing, like curious sort of environments that you can just find by looking close up at areas of nature. And I just want to conclude by kind of talking about what I've been doing since I've graduated. So I've just been doing like a lot of outdoor painting and like making use of the nice weather. It's super buggy here, so I have to carry around this mosquito net when I paint in the forest, but I'm really enjoying painting from life. It like adds that real like liveliness, I feel, than using photographs or like dead or pressed flowers or whatever. This is what it looks like inside. And then here's the latest painting I've done. And it's this kind of abstracted painting of lichen. And so yeah, from here I intend to just like keep sort of like traveling around or just using inspiration from my backyard to create these kind of like ambiguous, semi-abstract, kind of lively, all over composition pastel paintings. And yeah, I think that's probably about all I wanted to say. I don't know if you guys had any questions or anything.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, the floor is open, so if anybody has any questions, feel free to put your video on or unmute yourself, or I'm looking at the group chat too and I can relay it. Well, I, for one, am impressed with the way that you kind of create a collage, but with things that you find in nature, which is kind of a bit different, and then you work from that. I think that's a really interesting way of working with your paintings. It's not really a question, it's just a thought.
Thanks. Mm-hmm.
Actually, I have a question. So that last painting, did you do it after you graduated?
Yeah.
That's
yes,
interesting, because I wanted to ask, like, do you find that your practice has changed at all, like, in that time, or are you kind of working with the same ideas?
I still want to keep exploring that idea, like finding that weird line between abstract and realistic. I think I probably will do landscapes as well, and just like painting things that because I still do find like that real joy of just like imitating nature. But yeah, I do like the idea of abstracting like this piece of lichen or whatever. It's still, I don't know if it looks like lichen to you guys. I can't really tell from an outside perspective, which is kind of funny. When I look at it, it like looks like lichen to me, but I still try to abstract it. Yeah, but I think, yeah, to answer your question, I think that I'm going to keep on going with this theme, but then also just like explore other themes at the same time. Yeah.
Have you ever considered or looked into making your own ink or paint using things from nature? Because I know I'm personally really interested in that, and I've been making my own sort of like inks using lichen or moss, things that I find around, and I think that would be really interesting.
Wow. I didn't know you could actually do that at all.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool. Yeah, I've thought about like trying to incorporate actual nature into my paintings somehow. It hasn't really been something I've explored at all, but people have suggested it to me, and I've kind of thought about it. Like sometimes unintentionally I'll get like bits of dirt and stuff into my paintings and I just don't get it out, and there'll be like bugs and stuff trapped in the paintings, and I'm like, whatever ends up going in the painting is going to stay in the painting. But I haven't really like intentionally like used that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm.
So I have a message from Angus saying, I don't know anything about art, so I can't contribute, but it's very nice.
Thanks, Angus. That's sweet.
Awesome. Okay. Okay.
I guess
Wow.
I had another question. Like that last photo of you that you showed, like it almost looks like it could be some sort of performance. Like I feel like because it's such a production to paint outside, it like that almost becomes like a creative act as well. Like, do you think that you might like end up making things outside of 2D media, or?
I haven't really thought about it. I have had a lot of feedback on the models themselves, especially like the one of the broken petals being behind the canvas, which was kind of like not really anything I put thought into, that those petals were shoved in behind a canvas or anything like that. It was kind of just materials I had around my studio. And I think what partly made those models so interesting is that I don't put a lot of like effort into thinking about like what the models like look like in themselves. Like I'm just thinking about how can I abstract these models for my paintings. So I think part of what makes the models interesting is that I'm not trying to make like sculptures out of them. And part of me thinks that if I did these models on purpose, that I would kind of lose that kind of roughness to them. But yeah, I haven't actually explored sculpture a lot because there's only so much you can do in an art degree or whatever. So I didn't really pursue sculpture, but I've always been really intrigued in like that biomorphic kind of sculptures, or when people make sculptures out of the land, like just using like leaves or sticks or whatever. So yeah, I haven't really given it much thought to creating those works in themselves, but I've thought about like doing a better job of documenting the models that I have been making for my paintings.
I was muted.
Okay,
Any other questions? Well, that was really wonderful. Thank you so much, Eclipse. We really feel honored to have you here talking to us, sharing your artistic practice with us.
Yes, thank you so much for letting me talk and yeah, giving me the stage for a little bit. And yeah, really happy to do this for you guys. And I'm really thankful for everyone that tuned in and listened to the talk.
Awesome. Angela, how do you say your last name?
Gemeinwieser.
Gemeinwieser. Okay, we have Angela Gemeinwieser next week, so on Thursday the 28th of May. So if you guys are interested, stay tuned and join us 6 to 8 p.m. May 28th to hear Angela talk about her work. And I think that's it. That's all. Any other last words? Great. Well, stay tuned. We will post this to our YouTube account as well as online, or through our social media accounts. So if you want to see it again or share it with anybody you know, it will be there. And that's it. That's all.